Hey students, this is Mr. Bornheimer, and this is going to be your Math 7, Chapter 6, or Unit 6, Section 4 tutorial video. One of the things I kind of want to bring to your attention is some of the problems in this particular section dealing with percents are a little bit more challenging than you might be used to, okay? And part of it is that we're starting to think about percents in a little bit more of an abstract way. What I mean by this is that we're not just using a simple equation and plugging in the numbers. We actually have to think about what a percent is. And I want you to recall that a percent is a way to represent a part of something. Okay, so a percent is a part of a whole. And you've seen me use this representation, these words part and whole before. Okay, now there are a couple of different types of problems in this particular section. Some deal with estimating, and we're going to look at those in just a minute. And some deal with this idea of trying to find or use parts of percents, easy percents that we're familiar with, like 100%, 50%, 25%, 10%, 1%, these kinds of things. So to review this idea a little bit, I think that it's important that we look at some of these basic percents, okay? And so here we go. Recall that when you are trying to find 10% of something, that 10% is really 1/10, okay, of whatever it is you're looking at. Because 10% is really the same thing as 10 over 100, which equals 1 over 10. So if you're trying to find 10% or something, you're trying to find 1/10, then this actually leads to this idea where we would divide by 10. Okay, so kind of thinking about if I wanted to find 10% of 20, I would divide 20 by 10, and then that would give me 2. And 2 is 10% of 20. Okay, so there's an example of that. And then if we was looking at something like 1%, okay, 1% is the same thing as 1 over 100. So what you would be doing is, that's as simple as it gets. You would be taking 1/100th of something. So it's like dividing something into 100 pieces and taking one of them. So the way you would utilize or represent this mathematically is you divide whatever it is you're working with by 100 to find 1%. Okay. There's some other ones. For instance, 25%. This is one that you might be familiar with. If you have 25 cents, you have 1 quarter, okay? If you have 4 quarters, you have $1 or a whole, okay? So 25 cents is only 1/4 of $1. Well, it's only 1/4 of 100. So when simplified, it looks something like this. 25 over 100 equals 1/4. And what this is that in order to use this, you would divide any number that you're trying to find 25% of by 4. Notice here, there's a pattern that when we're looking at the simplified version of the percent as a fraction, okay, let me highlight these real quick. Like here, 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 we're always dividing by the denominator. Okay, we're dividing by the denominator. So for 10%, we divide by 10 because the simplified fraction is 1/10. For 1%, we divide by 100 because the simplified fraction is 1 over 100. For 25%, the simplified fraction is 1/4, representing the percent. So we divide by 4. And if you see, now that we kind of see that rule, you can see it play out in 50%, where we have 50 over 100. That's the same thing as 1 over 2. So you could guess that we would divide whatever number we want to know 50% of, we would divide it by the denominator, which is 2. Okay? So that's kind of how this works. Now, when we're estimating, we want to estimate things so that they are close to numbers that are easy to work with. Okay? Numbers that are not easy to work with oftentimes are things that end in like 3 or 7 or 9, sometimes even 8, okay? We want things to either end in 5s or 0s because those are going to be the easiest, all right? So I guess I should probably include in this list one more number, and that would be 20%, okay? Which when we break it down into a fraction is 20 over 100. Any percent can be written over 100, all right? And then when you simplify that, that's 1/5. So again, if you want to know 20% of something, you divide by 5. Okay, because again, we're dividing by that denominator when the fraction in simplest form. All right, this is kind of just one of those unique situations where this works. This is not necessarily a rule, but it's a habit that you will probably get into over time. So let's take a look at a couple of problems similar to what you might see in your homework tonight. Let's say that we have something like this, okay? Let's say that we want to know 19% of 17, okay? And we're asked to estimate or write an equation to estimate this, okay? So what I would do is if the key word here is estimate, if that is in the instructions, that means I have a little bit of flexibility. I'm allowed to round a little bit, okay? I'm allowed to round. So I kind of have two options, two approaches I can take here. First of all, I'm going to round that 19% because it's a tough number to work with. I'm going to round that because I'm allowed to estimate. I can round a little bit. I don't want to go crazy. I'm allowed to round that. So I'm going to round that to 20%. That's 1% away. It's really close, and it'll give me a close approximation. What that means is it'll allow my answer to be really close to the right answer. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and work this to say that this is really close to 20% of 17. Okay, notice that I've changed that number just a little bit. Now, go back to my table here. 20% is really 1/5 of the whole. Okay, I'm really working with only one part, 20% of the total 100%. So, if 20% of 17 is only 1/5 of 17, then that would be the same thing as saying, okay, then all I really need to do is take 17 and divide it by 5. And when I do this, I have two options. I can divide those and write it as a decimal, or I can just turn it into a mixed number and be done with it. And so that's what I'll do here. 5 goes into 17 3 times, okay? And so I'll end up with 3. There would be a remainder of 2 left over because 5 times 3 is 15. To get to that 17, we'd have to go 16, 17. That's 2 times. Okay? And so what we have here is 3 and a smoke detector going off. We have 3 and 2/5. And so that would be a really close approximation, okay, of the right answer. And if you were to do this in decimal form, you would see that the answer would be 3 point, and then you could do a little finagling here, but ultimately it'd be like 3.4, okay? So that would be the approximate decimal answer for this question, okay? So that's kind of how we estimate, all right? Now, if I were to try to actually figure out the real answer to a problem, and I'm working with a percent like 19%, and I wanted to know the exact answer, that's a little bit more difficult, okay? So what I would do here is I would look at maybe trying to break that 19% up a little bit. So here's how that kind of looks. Let's say that you were asked to find the actual 19% of 17. Okay. Well, there's really two approaches to this problem. First of all, I could say something along the lines of, well, 19% is really the same thing as 10% plus 5% plus 1% plus 1% plus 1% plus 1%. That's the same thing as 19%, because it adds up to 10 plus 5 is 15, plus 4 ones is 4 more percent, that's 19%. Okay, so this equals 19%. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my table here, and I'm going to say, well, 10%, you really just divide by 10. So I take 17 and I divide it by 10. Okay. And that's going to equal 1.7. Now, 5% is really half of 10%. So if I was going to look at 5% here, I'd say, okay, well, that's 1.7 divided by 2. Because 1.7 is 10% of 17. And I can take and I can divide that by 2 to find 5%. So half of 1 is 0.5, and half of 7, or 0.7 is 0.35. So the answer is 0.85. Now, 1% kind of falls under that category here, where we would divide by 100. Okay, so to find 1%, I would just take 17, and I divide it by 100. Really what that does is that moves the decimal 2 places to the left. Okay, and so I'm going to end up with 0.17. And I have 4 of those. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have 0.17, 0.17, 0.17, 0.17. So when I add up all of these numbers, which is 10% of 17 plus 5% of 17 plus 1% of 17 plus 1% of 17 plus 1% of 17 plus 1% of 17, all of those numbers will add up to the number that is 19% of 17. Okay? And so what I can do is I can put these all on paper and I can add them up. And part of what we're doing here is we're just learning different strategies, ways to think about breaking up numbers. Okay? So I'd have 1.7, okay, plus 0.85, 0.17, 0.17, 0.17, and I need to move this just a little bit. 0.17. I'm going to add all of those up, and I'm going to do some quick arithmetic here. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this. Okay, and what we see happen after I do the arithmetic, okay, is that we end up with 3.23. So 3.23 is 19% of 17. This is about as hard a type of problem as you're going to see. Okay, most of your problems are going to try to deal with things that are 10%, 1%, 25, 50, 20%, and things very close to that. Okay, there's another approach we could have taken with this problem, and that is if we had done it this way. 19% of 17 is really the same thing as finding 20% of 17, but then subtracting 1%. And when you find 20% and you subtract 1%, we're working with 2 easy numbers. And ultimately, it's just one simple problem, and then that'll give us 19%. So when we were using our estimation strategy back here, we found that 20% was 3.4. Okay, so I know that 20% of 17 equals 3.4. And if I subtract 1%, which equals, if you recall, 0.17, okay, you can kind of see it here, 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 and here. It's when we took 17 and divided it by 100. Then I've got 0.17. Okay, and when I subtract those two numbers, I get 3.23. Okay, so which is 19% of 17. Okay, so these are ways that we need to start thinking about percents, breaking them up. Now, as we move forward, we're going to look at some methods of working with percents that are a little bit easier. However, when we are done with this, it is my goal that you will be able to look at a percent and in your head work with some of these simple percents to at least be able to estimate something closely. Okay, that's kind of the goal here, is to work on our estimation strategies, our mental math strategies. Okay, so these are important strategies in helping us to build strong mental math skills so that when we see percents, our ability to understand them and comprehend them increases. Okay. All right, I'm going to do one more problem and then we'll call it quits. Okay, here we go. All right, let's say that we have 22% of 32. Okay, this is what we're working with. So different ways that we can look at this. Okay, ultimately what I might do is I might do a little estimating first. Okay, so I might say, okay, let's find at least 20% of 32. Okay, so that's what I'll start with. Okay, to find 20% of 32, I would go ahead and I would go back to my table here, and I would see that 20% is 1/5. So if I take 32 and divide it by 5, I'm going to be finding 20%. So I take 32 and I divide it by 5. Okay, and if I turn this, at least at first, into a mixed number, I see that 5 goes into 30 6 times, and I'm left with a remainder of 2/5, like so. Okay. Now, if you were to turn this into a decimal, you would see that this works out to be 6, okay, 0.40. All right, and part of where I got that is I took the 2 and I divided it by 5 in my head, and I know that that equals 0.4. You could do this easily on a calculator, or use maybe some strategies. Maybe you know how to do this in your head as well, which I try, at least try it first that way. But if you took 32 and divided it by 5, you'd get 6.40. Okay. Then I say, okay, that's easy enough. Now I just need to find that other 2%. Okay. So what I do is I say, okay, well, 1% is just going to be the number divided by 100. Okay, because I'm only trying to find 1/100th of the piece. Okay, if everything is broken up into 100 pieces, I only want to find 1/100th. So I can divide anything by 100 and I'll get 1%. So 32 divided by 100, okay, is going to be 0.32. That's 1%. 1% of 32. All right, so I can use this information to help me put together a very accurate answer of 22%. So what I would do is I would say, okay, 20% plus 1% plus 1% equals 22%. And I know that 20% is 6.40. I know 1% is 0.32. And I know 1% is 0.32. So if I add these three numbers, I will find the number that is 22% of 32. So let's go ahead and do the arithmetic. 6.40 plus 0.32 plus 0.32. Okay, I'm going to do this. So I have 4 here, and I end up with what looks to be 0 here because that adds up to 10. I carry the 1 over, and I get 7.04. 7.04 is 22% of 32. Okay? So that's kind of what we're working with here. All right. Any questions? It's a video. Hopefully you don't have any questions, but if you do, you can go ahead and email me, and be glad to help you with any of the questions that you may have. Okay, so this is Mr. Bornheimer signing off.